I have a bad knee. It started bothering me about 4 years ago when I came down hard on a tennis court and never quite healed right. My doctor told me to stop running, stop twisting, and most importantly, stop doing things that put pressure on it. I have ignored every single piece of that advice because I am 61 years old and I have never once in my life done the sensible thing when someone I love needed me. My name is Gerald Moore. I spent 28 years working as a high school principal in Savannah, Georgia. I know children. I know how they look when they are happy, when they are pretending to be fine, and when they're quietly breaking apart on the inside. I know what it sounds like when a kid has given up hope. And I know it because I have heard it more times than I ever wanted to. Welcome to Daddy's Revenge. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because the people in these stories had every single chance to do the right thing. They just didn't. Stay with me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Not a call, a text. It was from my granddaughter, Lily. She is 8 years old. She has big brown eyes and a laugh so loud it bounces off walls. She has been in our family since she was 3, adopted by my son Marcus and his wife Denise after 2 years of foster care with them. Lily had come to them scared of loud noises and slow to trust strangers. She had learned, slowly and carefully, to believe that home was safe. That text message was just 4 words. Grandpa, are you awake? No question mark. No emoji. Nothing. Just those 4 words at midnight. I was up before my feet hit the floor. I called her back immediately. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was very small, the kind of small that has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with a person trying to hold themselves together from the inside out. Grandpa, she said. Just my name. Yeah, baby girl, I said. I'm right here. Tell me. She took a breath, so shaky it almost sounded like a hiccup. They went on the boat. I stood very still in my bedroom. I said it back to her slowly. Who went on the boat, Lily? Daddy and Mama and Cody. Cody is my son Marcus's biological son from before he met Denise. 13 years old, smart kid, bit of a handful. They all went on the boat. Without her, I need you to understand what I was hearing. Not just the words, the weight underneath them. A child who had spent years learning that she was safe, that she was chosen, that she was kept. Being left behind while her family boarded a $20,000 cruise ship. She did not yell. She did not scream. That would have been easier, honestly. She just said, they told me it was a school trip, Grandpa. A school trip. Lily's school was not out. Cody's school had a spring break that week. Lily was supposed to stay with a neighbor she barely knew. For 7 days. She had been at that neighbor's house for 2 days already when she finally got to her little pink phone and texted me at midnight. Because she had been waiting. She had actually been waiting for them to come back and tell her it was all a joke. I'm not a man who cries easily. I have sat with grieving parents. I have had to call families when a student didn't make it home. I have held the hands of kids who had nobody else and told them that I saw them, that they mattered, that the world was not as cold as it felt right now. I have done all of this without falling apart because someone needed me to be steady. I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed that night, and I said absolutely nothing for about 15 seconds because I could not speak. Not without saying things I could not take back. I pressed my hand flat to my chest, took one breath, then another, and I said, Lily, are you safe right now? She said yes. I said, are you warm? She said yes. I said, okay. Grandpa is coming. I could hear her exhale like she had been holding air in since the ship left the dock. I called my sister Renee first. She lives 12 minutes from me in Brunswick, Georgia. She is 64, retired, and has the energy of someone half her age and the common sense of someone twice it. I told her what was happening in about 90 seconds. She said only one thing. Do you need me to drive, or will you be okay? I said I'd be okay. She said, call me the second you land, and call me again before you do anything you can't undo. That last part she said with the specific emphasis of a woman who has known me for 61 years and has watched me do a great many things I later had to apologize for. I told her I heard her. I mostly meant it. Then I opened my laptop and started looking at flights from Brunswick Golden Isles to Miami, because that was where the cruise had departed from and where, according to the itinerary Marcus had texted me 3 weeks ago, the ship would be stopping in 3 days. I want to be very honest about something here. I am not a wealthy man. I am a retired principal. My pension is comfortable, but not lavish. Booking a last-minute flight and a last-minute cruise ticket to intercept a 7-day sailing was not a small decision. My hands actually hesitated over the keyboard for a moment. Then I thought about Lily's voice. For words at midnight. "Grandpa, are you awake?" I booked the flight. One way. 43 minutes in the air. Then I called the cruise line's customer service number, which I want to tell you right now is not designed for people trying to board in a port midway through a sailing. The woman I spoke to was very patient. She spoke slowly and carefully, like she was explaining something to someone who maybe should not be doing what they were doing. I told her I needed to join my family. She told me it was complicated. I told her I had all night. By 2 in the morning, I had a boarding confirmation, a one-night-only cabin rate that was frankly criminal in its price, and a bag half-packed on my bed. I called Lily back. She was awake. I told her to try to sleep and that I would be on a plane in a few hours and that she was going to be okay. She asked me, "Grandpa, are you really coming?" Not like she doubted me. More like she needed to hear it said out loud again. "Yes, Lily Bug," I said. "I am really coming." I could hear something change in her breathing, like a knot coming loose. She said, "Okay." "Then, Grandpa?" "Yeah, baby. Thank you for believing me." I had to put the phone down for a second after that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. My neighbor Dale drove me to the airport at 4:30 in the morning without a single complaint. He is 70 years old and a former Marine, and he asked me only one question the entire drive, which was, "Do you want me to come with you?" I told him no. He said, "All right then. Call me if you change your mind." He walked me to the drop-off curb, shook my hand in that firm way that says more than most speeches, and drove away. I had my carry-on bag, my reading glasses, a yellow legal pad that I had already started filling with notes, and a voice recorder app open on my phone. Old habits from 28 years of documentation. If something important was about to happen, I was going to write it down. I was going to have dates. I was going to have times. I was going to have everything in order before a single confrontation happened, because I did not come this far to lose on a technicality. The flight was short and smooth. I sat in a window seat and watched the Georgia coast give way to open Atlantic, and I thought about Marcus. My son, 41 years old, an engineer, precise, logical, careful with numbers. He had been a good boy. He had grown into a man I was mostly proud of. He had married Denise 6 years ago, and she was sharp and organized, and I had genuinely believed that she loved Lily. I had watched her hold that little girl when she cried. I had watched her teach her to braid her own hair. I had watched her clap the loudest at Lily's school recital last spring. Something had shifted. Something had gone sideways somewhere that I did not see coming. And I needed to understand what that was before I decided what to do about it. I landed in Miami at 8:20 in the morning. The air outside the terminal was thick and warm and smelled like jet fuel and salt. I picked up my rental car from a counter staffed by a cheerful young man who tried to upgrade me to a convertible. I told him no thank you and that I was not on vacation. He sensed something in my voice and stopped the sales pitch immediately. I drove straight to the cruise terminal. The ship, the Majestic Horizon, was a floating city, white and massive against the blue of Biscayne Bay. I stood outside and looked at it for a long moment. Somewhere on that ship was my son. Somewhere on that ship was a man who had taken his biological son on a $20,000 cruise and left his 8-year-old adopted daughter in the care of a neighbor she barely knew. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. I walked to the terminal. Boarding as a solo passenger midway through a sailing is not impossible, but it is not easy. There is paperwork. There are background checks. There's a very specific kind of look that cruise terminal staff give you when you explain that you need to board alone to join your family, who is already on the ship. I answered every question calmly and completely. I had my ID, my booking confirmation, and the patience of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades dealing with bureaucratic school board systems. After 40 minutes and 2 supervisors, I was cleared. I walked up the gangway with my carry-on and my legal pad and the very particular kind of fury that has had time to cool into something much more dangerous than heat. Not anger that shouts. Resolve that plans. The ship was enormous. 11 decks. A pool on the top level. Multiple restaurants. A theater. An entire deck for kids' activities. I dropped my bag in my cabin on deck 4, which was barely big enough to turn around in and smelled strongly of lemon cleaning solution. I did not care. I sat on the edge of the small bed, opened my legal pad, and wrote down everything I knew. The dates Marcus had told me about the trip. The exact wording of the text that said it was a school trip for Cody. The name of the neighbor where Lily had been left. The things Lily had said on the phone. Every detail. Then I started thinking about where on this ship Marcus would be right now on a Wednesday morning. And I smiled for the first time since my phone buzzed the night before. Because I knew my son, and I knew exactly where he had his morning coffee. I found him at the Sunrise Deck Cafe on Deck 9. Marcus was at a table near the railing with a mug in front of him and a paperback book he was not really reading. Denise was scrolling her phone. Cody was eating a plate of eggs and looking out of the water. They looked perfectly relaxed. They looked like a family on vacation. 3 of them at a table set for 3. Not a chair pulled out, not a space left, not even the unconscious gap you leave when someone just stepped away for a moment. 3 chairs, 3 people, no room for a 4th. Marcus looked up when I was about 6 feet away. The color drained out of his face so completely and so fast that Denise looked up from her phone to see what he was staring at. She saw me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Hi, son," I said. I kept my voice even and pleasant the way I used to keep it when I walked into a classroom where something had gone very wrong and I needed everyone to stay calm until I understood the situation. Marcus stood up. He knocked his coffee mug with his elbow and caught it just before it tipped. "Dad, what are you? How did you?" I sat down in the empty chair at a neighboring table and pulled it over without being invited. Cody stared at me with the wide eyes of a teenager who absolutely knew that whatever was about to happen was not going to be good. I said, "Good morning, Cody." He said, "Hey, Grandpa." To his credit, the kid looked uncomfortable. Not surprised, notably. Uncomfortable. Like he had been waiting for this moment and was not happy that it had arrived. Denise recovered first. She put her phone face down on the table, which is the universal signal that someone is preparing to have a serious conversation. "Stephen," she said, using my name instead of Dad the way she always did when she was drawing a line. "We should talk privately." "I agree completely," I said, "and we will. But first I want to ask Marcus one question in front of all 3 of you." Marcus sat back down slowly. He looked like a man who had just been handed a bill he knew was coming, but had hoped would arrive later. I said, "Does Lily know where you are right now?" Long pause. "She knows we're on a trip," he said. I said, "Does she know it's a cruise?" Another pause, longer. I said, "Marcus, she has been at the Hendersons' house for 2 nights. She texted me at midnight." Cody looked down at his eggs. Denise looked at the railing. Marcus looked at me. The thing about knowing someone their entire life is that you can read them. I watched something move across my son's face that was not defensiveness and not anger. It was something quieter and worse. It was recognition, like a man who has been walking a road for a long time and has finally looked up and realized he has no idea how he got here. I did not press the moment. I let it sit. That is something you learn when you spend 28 years working with young people. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is be completely silent and let a person sit in the truth of what they have done. The ocean moved quietly beneath us. Somewhere below on the pier, a seagull screamed. Marcus said, "How is she?" That question told me several things at once. It told me he knew she was not okay. It told me the guilt had been there already, running underneath whatever justifications he had built above it. It told me there was still something in him that could be reached. I said, "She asked me if I was awake." "Midnight, Marcus." An 8-year-old texted her grandfather at midnight because she had nobody else to tell. He pressed his lips together. He nodded once, very small. Denise looked at the table. She had that particular stillness of someone who is deciding, in real time, whether to apologize or defend. I have seen that stillness many times. In parents sitting across from me after something went wrong at school. In people on both sides of a hard conversation. I waited to see which way she would go. She said, "We thought it would be less disruptive to Lily's schedule." School was still in session for her. The routine is important for her. You know that, Gerald. I said, "I do know that. I also know that Cody's school had spring break this week, and Lily's school offers spring break in 2 weeks. So the schedule argument would have worked just as well in 2 weeks." Silence. I said, "How much did this cruise cost?" Marcus said, "Dad, that's not." I said, Marcus, I'm not asking as an accusation. I am asking because I want to understand. He was quiet. Denise said, the package was around $20,000. I said, $20,000 for 3 people. And you couldn't find a way to make it 4. Not even a conversation about changing the dates. Not a word to me. I could have helped. That was when Denise's eyes went a little wet. Not the performance of crying. The involuntary kind. I want to be clear about something. I did not go on that ship to destroy my son's marriage or to humiliate anyone in front of their child or to win some kind of argument. I went on that ship because an 8-year-old girl texted her grandfather at midnight and asked if he was awake. And because that little girl had already spent the first 3 years of her life learning that the people who were supposed to love her would leave. I was not going to be another adult in her life who received that signal and let it pass. I excused myself from the table, told Marcus I would meet him alone at the pool bar at 11 o'clock, and walked back toward my cabin. I had 4 hours to organize my thoughts. I used every one of them. I ordered room service, scrambled eggs, and coffee. I sat at the tiny desk in my 400-square-foot cabin, and I wrote. I wrote out a timeline on my legal pad, starting from the day Marcus and Denise had brought Lily home from her foster placement. Every birthday I could remember. Every holiday gathering. Every school event I had attended where I noticed who else was there and who was not. I am a man who pays attention. 28 years as a principal teaches you to notice the children who are slightly outside the frame. The ones at the edge of the group photo. The ones whose names the teacher says last. The ones who stop raising their hands after a while because they have learned that being seen does not always feel safe. I had noticed these things about Lily over the past 2 years. I had told myself I was imagining it. I had told myself Marcus and Denise were good parents who were doing their best. I had let it go every time. I was not letting it go anymore. I called Lily at 10 o'clock from my cabin. She was at the Hendersons' house, sitting in their backyard in the sun. She had eaten pancakes for breakfast, which she told me about in detail. She had seen a lizard on the fence. She asked me if I was on the boat. I said, yes, I'm on the boat. She said, Grandpa, did you see Daddy? I said, not yet. I'm going to talk to him a little later. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is he in trouble? I said, nobody is in trouble, Lily. We're just going to have a conversation. She said, okay. Then she said, are you going to bring me home, Grandpa? And I said, yes, baby girl. When this ship gets back to Miami, you are coming home with me. She said, to your house? I said, for as long as you want. She said, for a long time? I said, for a very long time. Marcus was at the pool bar at 11 sharp. He had traded his vacation ease for something much more careful. He sat with his hands wrapped around a glass of water, and he looked at me the way grown children look at their parents when they have run out of the energy it takes to defend themselves. I sat across from him. I put my legal pad on the table between us face down, not to hide it, just to let him know it existed. I said, I am not here to fight with you. He said, I know, Dad. I said, I need you to help me understand. He exhaled slowly. He said, it started with the cost. The cruise was a thing Denise had wanted for a long time. Her parents used to take her on cruises when she was a kid. It was her idea of a real family vacation. And when we started pricing it out, with the cabin and the excursions and all of it, adding another person felt like it just kept growing. I said, so it was money. He said at first. Then he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and Cody asked specifically for it to be just the 3 of us. I kept my face still. I said, Cody asked for Lily not to come? Marcus looked uncomfortable. He said, he didn't put it that way. He said he wanted a trip that was just us. Meaning him, me, and Denise. I said, did you explain to Cody that us means the whole family now? Marcus said nothing. I said, Marcus, Lily came into your home when she was 3 years old. You went to court. You signed documents. You made promises, not just to a judge, but to a little girl who had already lost everything once. He nodded. He already knew this. He knew this so well that knowing it was apparently making him feel terrible. But feeling terrible and changing course are very different things. He said, Denise has struggled with it more than I realized. I said, struggled with what? He said, with Lily being difficult sometimes. I said, she is 8. Marcus said, I know, but she has the tantrums and the attachment issues from before, and Denise has her own stuff from her childhood, and I think sometimes they just... He stopped. I said, Sometimes they just what, Marcus? He looked at the water. He said, I think sometimes Denise sees Lily as the hard thing and Cody as the easy thing, and I should have noticed how that was adding up, and I didn't. He said the last part very quietly. He was not making excuses. He was actually saying the true thing. I've spent my career watching people try not to say the true thing. When they finally say it, it sounds different. It sounds like that. I said, what are you going to do about it? He looked at me. I said, I'm not asking what you should do. I'm asking what you are actually going to do. Because here's what I see, Marcus. Your daughter is at a neighbor's house at midnight texting her grandfather because she did not have a single person in her immediate family she felt she could call. And she's been building toward that moment for a while. I can see it looking back. I should have said something sooner. That is on me too, and I own that. But we are past the point where noticing it and feeling bad about it is enough. He said, I know, Dad. I said, tell me what you're going to do. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to fix it. I said, wanting is the first inch. What is the next step? We talked for nearly 2 hours at that pool bar. The ship moved through the Caribbean, and the sun got higher, and the bar slowly filled up with people in swimsuits and sunglasses, and nobody paid us any attention. Marcus talked more honestly than I had heard him talk in years. He talked about the way Cody, who was his firstborn from a relationship that ended badly before he met Denise, had always occupied a particular emotional space for him. The guilt of a divorced father, the overcorrection that comes from it. He talked about how Denise's struggles with Lily had started small, and he had chosen not to see the pattern because seeing it would have required him to have a very hard conversation with his wife. He talked about how $20,000 had felt like a reasonable thing to spend on a family vacation when you were carefully not counting one member of the family. I listened to all of it without interrupting. That is the other thing that 28 years with teenagers teaches you. People will tell you everything if you let them, if you stop talking long enough. People carry the truth around with them all the time. They just need someone to make enough space that it feels safe to put down. When Marcus finished talking, he looked exhausted and lighter at the same time. The particular release of having said the worst things out loud and found out that you're still sitting there, that nobody has left, that the conversation is still happening. I said, I love you. He blinked. I said, you know I love you. And because of that, I need to tell you something clearly. Are you listening? He said yes. I said, what is happening to Lily is not survivable for her, Marcus. Not the way it is going. And if it continues, I will not stay quiet. He said, what does that mean? I said, it means I am her grandfather, and I'm also a man who spent nearly 30 years fighting for children who were being failed by the adults in their lives. And I know the difference between a rough patch and a pattern. I open my legal pad. I turn it around so he could see the timeline I had been writing since 6 in the morning. I said, I have been watching this for 2 years, Marcus. I have been writing it down. Every birthday where Cody got the party and Lily got the cake. Every Christmas photo where she is slightly off to one side. Every school event where I was the adult who showed up. I have dates. He read down the page. His face went very still. He said, Dad, I didn't realize you were keeping track. I said, I was hoping I was wrong. I'm not wrong. Denise found us at the pool bar around 1 o'clock. She had clearly been thinking about the morning. She sat down with the careful posture of someone who has rehearsed something and then decided not to say the rehearsed thing. She looked at the legal pad. She looked at Marcus. She said, I know what you must think of me right now. I said, I try not to form complete opinions until I understand the full picture. She said, I love Lily. I said, I believe you. She looked surprised that I said it. I said, I believe you love her. I also believe that love is not the same as action and that Lily has been receiving less of both than she needs. Denise was quiet. Then she said something I did not expect. She said, I had a sister who was adopted when I was 9, and she got everything because she needed more. And I never. She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. She said, I know that is not Lily's fault. I know that. Here is the thing about complicated people doing complicated harm. It is rarely purely malicious. It is usually people carrying old wounds and letting those wounds make decisions for them. That does not make the harm less real. It does not make the consequences less serious. But it does mean that the path forward is not always what you think it will be when you first arrive, furious and ready for a fight. I looked at Denise for a long moment. I said, You need to tell that to a therapist. Not me. A real one. And you need to tell it to Lily eventually, too, when she is old enough to understand it, in a way that takes full responsibility without making her carry your healing." Denise nodded. She was crying now, the quiet kind. I handed her a napkin from a bar. I said, "I am not your enemy. I am the grandfather of your daughter, and I'm going to need you both to do better. Not for me, for her." We ate lunch together, the four of us, at the ship's main restaurant. It was strange and uncomfortable and also, somehow, necessary. Cody sat with his eyes mostly on his plate and said very little. At one point he said, "Is Lily okay?" I looked at him. I said, "She is going to be." He nodded. He said, "I didn't know she'd be alone that long." I said, "Cody, you are 13. You are not responsible for the decisions the adults in your life made." He looked relieved and guilty at the same time, which is a complicated combination for a teenager. I said, "But I do want you to think about something." He said, "Okay." I said, "You asked for a trip with just your dad and Denise. I want you to think about what Lily might have felt when she found out. Not to punish yourself, just to think about it." He said, "Yeah." He said it like someone who had already been thinking about it for days. The ship docked in Nassau that afternoon. The rest of the family went on an excursion. I sat on the deck and called my sister Renee. I told her everything that had happened. She listened without interrupting, which is rare for Renee. When I finished, she said, "So what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to bring Lily home with me when the ship gets back to Miami. And I'm going to have a very specific conversation with Marcus and Denise about what the next year needs to look like." She said, "And if they don't follow through?" I said, "Then I have a legal pad full of dates and a very clear understanding of what my options are." She said, "Good." Then she said, "Gerald, you went on a cruise ship alone with a bad knee to fight for an 8-year-old who isn't even biologically yours." I said, "She is mine." Renee said, "I know. That's why I said it." I called Lily again that evening from my cabin. She was watching a movie at the Hendersons. She told me about it in great detail. It had a dog in it, which she considered the most important feature of any movie. She said, "Grandpa, did you talk to Daddy?" I said, "I did." She said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "It is going to be better, Lily. I promise you it is going to be better." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Grandpa, do you think Daddy forgot about me?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Marcus sitting at the pool bar telling me the truth in a way that cost him something. I said, "I think your daddy made a mistake, Lily Bug. And I think he knows it. And I think knowing it is the first step to fixing it." She thought about that. She said, "Okay. Then, Grandpa, yeah, I love you. I love you too, baby girl. More than every star you can see from the water." Marcus knocked on my cabin door at 8 o'clock that night. He had something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me without saying anything. I opened it. It was a printed screenshot of a travel booking. 3 nights at Give Kids the World Village in Orlando. Lily's name on the reservation. Her favorite cartoon character package. The dates were 3 weeks away, right at the start of her school spring break. I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at Marcus. He said, "I know it doesn't fix it." I said, "No, it doesn't, but it is the right first step." He said, "Denise found a therapist. She has a consultation scheduled for next week." I said, "And what about you?" He said, "I booked one too. Same week." I nodded. I said, "And what about family therapy? All 4 of you together?" He said, "I looked into it. I have 3 options. I want to pick the right one." I said, "Good. That is the right answer." The next 2 days on that ship were unlike anything I had expected when I booked my flight at 2 in the morning. We were not a healed family. We were a family in the early, uncomfortable stages of becoming honest with each other. That is a specific and unglamorous kind of progress, but it is real progress. Marcus and I had breakfast together on the deck each morning. We talked about things we had not talked about in years. About his mother, my late wife Patricia, who had died 7 years earlier and whose absence had left gaps in this family that none of us had properly named. About the way grief does strange things to people who think they have moved past it. About how the holes we carry can make us reach for the easy thing and avoid the hard thing in ways we don't always recognize from the inside. Denise and I had one more conversation, alone, on the last morning before we docked. She found me at the railing at sunrise. She stood next to me for a while without speaking. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About my sister. I said, good. She said, I think I have been punishing Lily for something she had no part in. And I said, I know that, but I don't think I actually knew it, you know? Like I knew it in my head. I said, the head and the heart are a long way apart sometimes. She said, yeah. Then she said, Gerald, I want to be your mother. I said, then be her mother. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but be her mother in the choices you make when it would be easier to make a different choice. She nodded. She said, I hear you. I believed her. I reserved the right to keep watching. The ship docked in Miami on a Saturday morning. The sun was bright and the air was warm, and there were families everywhere with their suitcases and their Mickey ears and their sunburned noses. I carried my own bag off the ship and into the terminal, and I felt my bad knee complaining about the gangway incline the same way it always does, and I ignored it the same way I always do. Marcus and Denise had exchanged numbers with me to set up the family therapy consultation. Cody had given me an awkward side hug on the way off the ship, which from a 13-year-old boy is roughly equivalent to a lengthy written declaration of affection. So I counted it. I drove my rental car to the airport, turned it in, and booked a flight to Savannah. Then I called the Hendersons and told them I was coming to get Lily. She was waiting on the front porch when my taxi pulled up. She was wearing a yellow dress with little daisies on it, and her sneakers, and she had a small backpack on her back that looked mostly empty. She had been packed and ready, apparently, since that morning. I got out of the taxi, and she ran down the front path, and I bent down to catch her even though my knee said things about that decision that I chose to ignore entirely. She held on very tight. She smelled like sunscreen and someone else's laundry detergent, and underneath it, somehow, still herself. I held on just as tight. The Hendersons stood in the doorway, and Mrs. Henderson was pressing her hand to her chest in the way of someone trying not to cry in a touching moment in front of a stranger. I mouthed thank you to her. She nodded and waved us off. In the taxi on the way to the airport, Lily sat close against my side and watched the city go past the window. After a while, she said, Grandpa, did you get in trouble on the boat? I laughed. A real one. I said, a little bit. Not the bad kind. She said, did Daddy get in trouble? I said, I think your daddy got into the kind of trouble that is actually good for you. She thought about that. She said, like when I have to clean my room and it's annoying, but then I feel better after? I said, exactly like that. She nodded very seriously. She said, okay. Then she leaned her head against my arm and watched the buildings roll past, and she was quiet for a while. Then she said, Grandpa, yeah, can we get pancakes when we get to your house? I said, baby girl, we can get pancakes every single morning for as long as you are with me. She said, even chocolate chip ones? I said, especially chocolate chip ones. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks and months after that, because this story does not end on the gangway of a cruise ship. Marcus and Denise both followed through on their therapy appointments. Both of them. I checked, not because I was monitoring them like a parole officer, but because I asked and they told me, and the things they told me matched the things I observed when I saw them. They started family therapy in early May, all four of them together with a therapist who specializes in adoptive families. Lily told me about it one evening on the phone. She said, we talk about feelings, Grandpa, like how everybody in the family has feelings and they are all allowed to be there. I said, that sounds right. She said, even me. I said, especially you, Lily. She said, the doctor said I am brave. I said, the doctor is correct. The trip to give kids the world happened on the third weekend in May. I was not there. That was intentional on my part. That trip was not for me. It was for Lily and for Marcus and Denise to take the first real steps of repairing something together, without an audience, without a referee. Marcus sent me a photo that Saturday night. Just one. Lily in front of her favorite character, grinning so wide her eyes had nearly disappeared. Marcus's hand on her shoulder. Denise standing on her other side. Cody making a ridiculous face behind them. For people in a photo. For chairs at a table. I looked at that photo for a long time. I set it as the wallpaper on my phone. It is still there. I'm going to tell you the thing that I think about most when I think about all of this. It is not the cruise, or the confrontation, or the legal pad full of dates, or the gangway at sunrise. It is 4 words on a phone screen. Grandpa, are you awake? She did not say help. She did not say they left me. She did not describe the situation or ask me what she should do. She asked if I was awake, because she was not sure anyone was paying attention. She was not sure anyone was watching. She needed to know before she asked for anything else, before she said the hard thing out loud, whether there was anyone at all on the other end. I think about all the children in the world right now who are sending that same question to someone, not necessarily in words, sometimes in behavior, sometimes in silence, sometimes in the careful way they stop asking for things after a while. I am awake. That is the only answer. Not, I will help when it is convenient. Not, I noticed something but did not want to make it awkward. Not, I'm sure it will resolve itself with time. Just, I am awake. I am here. I am paying attention. You do not have to hold this alone. If you have a child in your life who is sending you that message, I want you to hear this. The call you make at 2 in the morning and the flight you book at 3 and the ship you board alone matter more than they will ever be able to tell you. They will not have the words for it when they are 8. They may not have the words for it when they are 30, but they will carry it with them, the knowing that someone came, the knowing that someone chose them when they did not have to. That knowing is load-bearing. It holds things up. Marcus called me on a Sunday afternoon in June. Lily had been back in his house for 3 weeks by then. She had asked to go home, which I want to tell you felt like its own kind of victory. Not the victory of keeping her away, but the victory of her wanting to go back. That is what the work was for. He called, and he said, "Dad, I want to tell you something." I said, "Okay." He said, "I was going through some boxes this weekend. Old photos. I found a picture of you in my first school play. I was 7. You were in the front row." I said, "I remember that play." He said, "Denise found a photo of her parents at Cody's first game. Second row." And then she looked and could not find a photo of Lily's school recital. From last spring, the one where Lily's class sang. He was quiet. I said, "I have a photo from that recital, Marcus. I was there." He said, "I know, Dad. I know you were. There's a photo on Marcus's wall now." I sent it to him. Lily in her purple top, third from the left in the second row, mouth wide, open singing. She looks absolutely delighted. She looks like a kid who has forgotten to be careful for a moment and is just fully, entirely happily there. Marcus had it printed and framed. It is on the wall in the hallway, next to the other family photos. Lily told me about it the next time she called. She said, "Grandpa, Daddy put a picture of me singing on the wall." I said, "I know." She said, "Right in the middle." I said, "Where it belongs." She said, "Daddy said you sent it." I said, "I did." She said, "Thank you, Grandpa." I said, "Thank you for singing loud enough for me to hear you all the way in the back row." She giggled. That giggle bounced off every wall in my kitchen. I sat with it for a long moment after she hung up. That sound, that is what all of this was for. I want to say something to any parent or grandparent who is watching this and recognizing something. Maybe it is small right now. Maybe it is just a feeling, a pattern you cannot quite name, a child who is slightly quieter than they used to be, a seat that seems always to be just slightly outside the center. I want to say to you, trust that feeling. Look closer. Ask the question, even if the answer might be hard. Make the call. Book the flight, whatever your flight looks like. The cost of paying attention is nothing compared to the cost of a child who learns to stop asking. I spent 28 years as a principal, and I can tell you with complete certainty that the children who are the hardest to reach later are always the ones who sent the signal early and found silence. Do not let the signal go to silence. Not in your family. Not on your watch. Lily turned 9 in August. We had a party. Not a small one. Marcus and Denise planned it. They asked her what she wanted, and she said she wanted everyone she loved in one place with cake that had strawberries on it. So that is what we did. My sister Renee came. My neighbor Dale came, which surprised Lily because she had never met him, and he arrived with a very large stuffed bear that was nearly as tall as she was. Cody was there, and he and Lily spent an hour in the backyard with water balloons, which ended with both of them completely soaked and Cody pretending he had not enjoyed it at all, which nobody believed. I sat in a lawn chair and watched it. I watched the whole afternoon like a man who has been waiting a long time for something and is finally letting himself believe it is real. It felt real. It felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. Before the cake, Marcus stood up and said he wanted to say something. The yard went quiet. He looked at Lily, who was sitting at the head of the table in a paper crown that Renee had made her, covered in glitter, extremely serious about wearing it correctly. He said, "Lily Bug, I want you to know something in front of everyone here." He had to stop for a second. He said, "I made a mistake this year. A big one. And I am sorry. For real and for always. You are my daughter, and that means you come first. Not sometimes. Always." Lily looked at him for a long moment in the way of a child, deciding whether something is true. Then she said, "Okay, Daddy." And that was it. "Okay, Daddy." 9 years old, and more grace in 2 words than most adults manage in a lifetime. I looked at her in her paper crown, and I thought, there she is. There's the girl who is always there, just waiting for enough room. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe to Daddy's Revenge for more real, honest, family-centered stories told by the people who live them. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, the signal is always there if you're paying attention. Be the person who is awake. See you next time.